Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Gerlinsky. I'm the Executive Director of Events and Thought Leadership at Hightower. Welcome to today's webinar, Fuel for the Fire, Updating the 4% Rule for Early Retirees. So FIRE, F-I-R-E, is an acronym for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And investors have long relied on the 4% rule as the fuel to determine how much they can withdraw from their portfolios. So today we have brought you Dr. Paulo Costa. He is an investment strategist on the investor behavior team with the Vanguard Investment Strategy Group. He holds a BA in economics from Yale and an MA and a PhD in economics from Harvard. And his most recent research is on the FIRE movement. Paulo has also shared his insight with Hightower advisors on various webinars and events. So we're really excited to bring him today directly to our clients. Welcome, Paulo.
Hi, Teresa. Thank you for having me. When people introduce me as someone who went to Yale and went to Harvard, I also want to say at the end of this, and he's a nice guy.
The
He always looks so.
nicest guy. Smart and nice, they can go together.
Yeah.
Paulo, what I love about this topic is, let's be honest, right? Who doesn't talk to their financial advisor about the possibility of early retirement? And I think this theme of financial independence, retire early, really resonates with millennials as well as with folks in their 50s who don't necessarily want to leave the job market, but would rather follow their passion projects. So, the goal of this time today is so that we can really share this latest research to help our advisors' clients inform their conversations and their thinking as part of their ongoing dialogue with their financial advisor. So with that, if those of you watching, if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A section on your screen, and then we'll do our best to get to them at the end. But Paulo, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be here. And I think this is such a cool topic because, like Teresa said, who doesn't want to retire early? And also within the pandemic, I think, the ideas of work and life balance, I think they have shifted a little bit. But one question, before we enter the presentation, you know, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the market performance today, year to date. The stock market is down almost 25%. The bond market is down 10 to 15%, and it's very unusual, right, to see both asset classes down at the same time and to this magnitude, right? So I think before we enter the talk, people may ask, is early retirement is still possible? But one thing that I like you to think about is every dollar that you have worked so hard to accumulate is really a way for you to buy peace of mind for moments like this. I know that the media and the economists like me, we like to talk about returns, but what really matters for the success of a financial plan, the most important thing is really all the hard work that you have put in to save money and invest money. Really, that money saved and that money invested over the long run is really the most meaningful thing for financial success, and that you have done already. So, and the other thing too is that when advisors come up with a plan, it is to withstand both good and bad times. And I know, the good times always feel fantastic, but what I would like to say is that if you felt good about your financial plan, say 12 months ago, just remain reassured that it's still good right now because it's made to withstand both the good and the bad times. And markets go up and down, like that's what markets do. So today I still think it's very important to talk about financial independence and retire early, just because this is something that people really think about and dream about, right? Who doesn't want to spend more time um, with their friends or with their family? So that's what we're gonna talk about today. So Let me go ahead and share my screen. Just to make sure, Teresa, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
It looks great.
Great. Okay, awesome. So let's go there. So, Fuel for the Fire, updating the 4% rule for early retirees. Um, so, what is the FIRE movement and why do I think you should care? So, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. So, what is this movement about? So, this movement has some core beliefs. So, these folks usually, aggressively cut their expenditures so that they can save as much as possible. And the idea here is to gain freedom by retiring early, so the RE at the end, or not, just becoming financially independent. Some people think that this is a really small movement, but I wanted to tell you that in a recent research that we did with millennials at Vanguard, 22% of them said that they plan to retire early. Another thing that to keep in mind is that when you ask people, when do you believe you're going to retire? A lot of people think, I'm going to work until I'm 70. What the data shows is that when they get to 55, they already start changing their minds and start to want to retire a little early. So you know financial independence is a fantastic goal, and retiring early is also a very noble goal. So we think this is very timely. And so what are the key considerations that we have here for financial planning? So I think there are two, and we talked about this a little bit. So the first thing is, since the pandemic, there has been a complete change in mindset about work-life balance. You know, um, I can tell you for myself, I've always been very career focused, but it's during the pandemic, spending more time with family and friends. I have thought, wow, I really like this, and this is really special. This is very different. And I want more of that. So I'm sure that many people share also this feeling, and maybe thinking about what can I do with my finances to achieve the goal that I want. um, and the second thing too is that one complaint that we hear often is that sometimes younger generations are not that interested in finance because think about someone who just graduated college, 22 years old, about to conquer the world, and then they say like, well, you got your first job and now you have to save for retirement. And then the person comes out and say, retirement is like 40 years from now. What are you talking about? I'm not interested in this. I'm interested to live right now. And this idea of financial independence is really attractive to this generation because it's something that they can understand better. Retirement seems very opaque and very down the line in the future for them, but financial independence and the ability to pursue passions, if they want, is something that they can really connect with. So people think that the FIRE movement is quite small, but I have two recommendations for you. I'm not at home today, so I didn't bring my materials with me, but I wanted to recommend two things for you. So the first one is, actually, there is an Amazon Prime documentary about the FIRE movement. So if you just want something, watch something related to the FIRE movement, it's a documentary called "Playing with Fire." There are all these funny little phrases with fire. So "fuel for the fire," but "Playing with Fire" is a good one, and that's a documentary on Netflix. And the second one is actually a book called "Your Money or Your Life." And just a quick summary of the book is to talk about how money is your life energy. So for you to gain money, you have to work. And through work, you're making an active choice to put some of your life energy to put into labor and in exchange for money. So what do you do with that money is also what you do with your life energy. So the point of the book, and it's, I know it feels a little touchy feelings, but it's actually a finance book. But the beauty of it is actually putting the idea of money in like humane like terms, not only thinking about returns and what can I do with my money to achieve the best investment outcome possible, but really what is money really about in my life. And I think it's just a delightful book. It doesn't really read as a finance book. So I just leave those two recommendations for people who are interested. Um, but who is the typical FIRE investor? So usually, those are people with high income and that are willing to save a large percentage of their income, usually between 30 and 60 years old. But if you read the Wall Street Journal or CNBC or Yahoo, every quarter they're gonna run an article about a 25-year-old that saved an aggressive amount of money and decided to retire early, or a 29-year-old. But those examples are very shiny, but really are folks between 30 and 60 years old. A lot of people in their 50s considering early retirement. So it's a really large movement, but has been in the fringes of finance, and in the past like 5 or 10 years has really claimed a space in the finance media. But what's key about this is that people talk a lot about FIRE with the RE at the end, but a lot of these people do not necessarily want to retire, but they want to have the freedom to do what they want. And I think that's very noble, especially because if you have been that person who have saved a large amount of money, you have to have a lot of discipline to do this, and you want to keep achieving things, but not necessarily in your primary career. It could be something else. Maybe you want to volunteer part time, or you want to change career, or you want to pursue something artistic that you didn't have the time to do it before. So all of this to say that financial independence is a lot more common than FIRE, than the part about retiring early. But understand that, the media really likes to talk about the folks that, retire early, are gonna live in Thailand and live by the beach, and it's all nice and the water's clear, because obviously that attracts more attention of the reader. But in the end of the day, is really those folks that want to go do something else with their lives and pursue another passion are really the main drivers of this movement. So what we're going to do today, um, first we're going to meet some FIRE investors, and then we're going to talk about the 4% rule, which is a very common retirement rule of thumb of how much money you should have before you can retire. And then we're going to see how this tend to not work super well for the FIRE movement, for people who tend to retire early. And then we're going to look into how can we improve the chances of success for FIRE investors, but really any investors. But the focus here will be the folks who want to retire early. So let's jump right into it. So let's meet some FIRE investors. So let's meet Marie and Larry. They're both 41 and they have retired at age 39. So their rationale for retirement was very simple. So they use the 4% rule. And what does the 4% rule say? So you're going to calculate your annual expenses, and they estimated that to be around $100,000 in retirement. And they're going to use the 4% rule to calculate their financial independence number. So 4% is 100,000. So 100% of what they need is 25 times that. So it's 2.5 million. So they decided to retire when they had $2.5 million. So they use the 4% rule to get to that number. And what is the 4% rule? So it's a very common rule that was created by Bill Bengen in 1994. And in his words is, assuming a minimum requirement of 30 years of portfolio longevity, a first year withdrawal rate of 4%, followed by inflation adjusted withdrawal in subsequent years, should be safe. So basically 4%, and then you adjust by inflation every year. So what are the assumptions that he used to come up with this rule? The first one is he used the historical returns, what happened in the past, as a guide to what's going to happen in the future. The second one, you see that he said, assuming a minimum required of 30 years of portfolio longevity. So he used a retirement horizon of only 30 years. He didn't consider any investment fees. He only used a US portfolio, so only US bonds and US stocks. And he used a fixed percentage withdrawal rule, so 4%. So you always do 4. It's a fixed percentage. So what we're going to see is that actually this rule doesn't really work for the FIRE movement. So we're going to revise these assumptions to present a more realistic scenario for the folks who want to retire early. And we're going to use the Vanguard principles for investing success to recalculate how we can come up with another rule that is going to be similar to the 4% rule, but it's going to help a lot in terms of success rates. So the first thing is the reliance on historical returns. So to your left, we look at the historical returns of the US stock market, the US bond market, and inflation since 1926. So you see that the US stock market on average has performed 10% a year. I know it sounds hard to believe, after this very tough year, but things have performed really well in the past. So 10% for US bonds, 5.3 for US bonds, and 2.87 for inflation. The inflation number is also a little tricky to look at now, with inflation this year running so high. But then these are the historical performance. So now let's see what the future holds, what the Vanguard Capital Markets model believes it's going to go on in the future. So the first, US equity. We are projecting for the next 10 years an annualized return of 5.1. For US bond, 3.6, and for US inflation, 2.5. We believe that most of inflation is behind us. That's why the 2.5 number. So compare the 10.3 to the 5.10. So what you see is that actually, in the past, the markets perform extremely well. And going forward, we don't believe it's going to be as good. So when planning, we should be careful not to assume that, things that happen in the past are necessarily going to repeat in the future. Always remember that any financial firm that puts anything about returns, we always have to put in the below the graph, past performance is no guarantee of future returns. It's right there here, right on the screen as well. And the reason is, things can change, and we cannot expect that what happened in the past is going to replicate in the future. So relying on historical returns can be hazardous for investors. So this is the first risk that we see in the 4% rule as it was created. It imagines that the performance of the stock market will necessarily repeat, and that is not always the case. So this is the first risk. The second one is a retirement horizon of 30 years. Again, the 4% rule assumes only a 30-year retirement horizon. But we're talking about FIRE investors, so people who retire early. So they are likely to be in retirement for longer than 30 years. Even people of regular retirement age may be in retirement for more than 30 years. With advancing medicine, longevity is a blessing, but we also have to think about how long can our portfolios stretch. So first, what we do there is to calculate the probability of success over different retirement horizons. So with the current market valuation, we believe that a 30 years in retirement, an investor has an approximately 81%, 82% probability of success. 40 years in retirement, that same portfolio now only has 53% chance of success. With 50 years in retirement, which is the case of a lot of people who retire early, 36% of success. And 40 years, 53, it's already a toss of a coin. 36%, it starts to get really uncomfortable for investors. So we will address this risk and how to make this better. But just understand that, the 4% rule doesn't seem as safe for people who plan to retire early. And also the 4% rule doesn't take into account fees. So, and that, every time that you invest money in any fund, you pay an expense ratio. So as you move to more expense funds, with the fees increasing, yes, it can get more expensive to invest, but also it's less money that you keep in your pocket. So as a consequence, your chance of success also decreases. Home bias is the idea that only investing in the US stock market and the bond market, and forgetting the rest of the world. The US is only 50% of the world market cap. There is 50% that is outside of the US. And we see that relying on a domestic only portfolio, um, with 50 years in retirement and in the current market valuation, that will give a probability of success of 36%. But if you now do a mix of domestic and international, that probability now of success jumps to 56%. So that's pretty good. Just a quick change to more diversification can really improve the probability of success. And finally, a fixed expanding rule. So a 4% rule, you always spend 4% adjusted by inflation. What Vanguard proposes is what we call a dynamic spending rule that basically looks at the market returns in the previous years to guide how much you should spend going forward. For example, if the market has performed really well, guess what? You can spend a little bit more. But if the market doesn't perform so well, you spend a little bit less. But you may ask, Paulo, how much less, how much more? And the idea here is that if the market perform better than 5% in a given year, you can increase your expenditure up to 5%. If the market performs worse than 5%, you cut down by most of 5%. So, it's just a 5% bound. So actually your spending doesn't really fluctuate much. It just fluctuates a little bit. And the idea is simple. If the market did well, you can reward yourself with a little bit more spending. But if the market didn't do well, it's better to cut back on spending a little bit because you want to take advantage of the market rebound and then to have more money invested. So then when the market rebounds, all the boats rise as well. So just going from the strict 4% rule to the dynamic spending rule that we propose at Vanguard, your probability of success now goes from 56 to 90%. So that's a massive, massive change. And what's cool about this is that we consider safe to have anything above an 85% chance of success. So a 90% of success, you're well on your way for a successful early retirement. So the key here really is to have that flexibility in the spending. That really, really goes a long way. And I think that's intuitive, right? Imagine for folks who are still working, I'll give you my personal example. If my boss comes to me and says, is about to tell me anytime how well I did this year, if he says, Paulo, you did fantastic, your bonus is going to be larger this year, obviously I'll spend a little bit more on the Thanksgiving and Christmas gifts. But if he tells me, Paulo, you didn't really do super well this year, and your bonus is not going to be great, obviously, I will have to contain my spending a little bit. And that's what this rule really is. Things are good, spend a little more. Things are not so good, spend a little bit less. And we call this fixed spending rule. I just call this life, right? I think this is very intuitive. It's just, finance academics have this way of complicating things that are really common sense, and this is one of them. So let's put all of this together. How can we improve the chance of success for the FIRE investors? So we're going to look at how following the Vanguard principles for investing success can potentially boost the retirees' withdrawal rate. So we're going to start with case A, then go B, C, D. So A is only using domestic investments, expensive mutual funds, and dollar plus inflation spending rule, so the 4% rule. Then in case B, we're going to add international investments for the additional diversification. Then in case C, we're going to reduce the cost of the mutual funds from 100 basis points to 20 basis points. And then D, instead of using the 4% rule, we're going to do a dynamic spending rule. So the dynamic spending starts at 4% and fluctuates the spending a little bit depending on how the market performs. So the initial withdrawal rates for these different portfolio assumptions goes from, so the case A, instead of 4%, you'd be able to start only with a 2.6%. If you now go and get international diversification, case B, you can go from 2.6 initial withdrawal to 2.8 initial withdrawal. C, reducing the expenses of the mutual funds from 100 basis points to 20 basis points. That's a 3.3 withdrawal rate. And then the case D, now using the dynamic spending rule, you go from a 3.3 to a 4% initial withdrawal rate. So you may ask, Paulo, what did you do here? You talked to me about 4% wasn't good, but now you're telling me it's 4% again. But the idea here is the assumptions are very different. Now we are using both domestic and international investments. We are not using expensive mutual funds, and we are allowing for flexibility on the spending of the portfolio. So let's see how this goes. So let's talk to the FIRE investors again. So say hello to Maria and Larry again. So remember, they retired with a portfolio of approximately 2.5 million. And let's assume that they were invested in a 50-50 equity fixed income portfolio. So our suggested improvement would increase the withdrawal rate, the initial that we saw, the 2.6 to 4.0, the 4%. So what does this mean in dollar terms? We like to talk about percentages, but really in the end, we spend dollars, right? So the first year withdrawal amount, the case A, the 2.6% would be $65,000. By now allowing them to, use the having more diversification with international funds, less expensive mutual funds, and the dynamic spending rule, now they can go back to spending $100,000 in the first year. So what's the difference between case A and case D? So this is an increase in $35,000, which in percentage is a 54% increase in spending. So that's a massive amount of change in the power of your dollars going forward just by making these changes. One thing to keep in mind is that with those assumptions, the probability of success of case A and case D was exactly the same, 85% chance of success. But what changed in case A and case D are the things that we talked to you about. So just making those little tweaks, the probability of success doesn't change, but you get to spend a lot more money. So that's why we think it's extremely important. These minor changes can really go a long way. But what I think this is really cool, again, is that changing our perception of work-life balance because of the pandemic. People have been really down now because the markets haven't been doing really well, and they feel like, I have to work more. All the dreams that I had recently about retiring early are far away. I mean, we are here to say it's not, and your advisor can really help you with that. And the second thing is, it's a great time to engage younger generations in the process of saving for retirement. The best time to save is actually, believe it or not, when the market is down, right? Because you're buying things when they are cheaper. I think Warren Buffett has that famous quote: "The stock market is the only supermarket that things go on sale and everybody runs away." So it's a great time for younger generations to invest. But I wanted to tell you how your advisor can really help you set you up for success, obtaining either financial independence or financial independence retire early. So the first thing is spending strategies. What I'm about to tell you may sound really weird, but it happens a lot, which is we are so used to have the mindset of saving and investing, and we tend to see in our working years to see the balance of our investments accounts to go up and up and up. Then when retirement comes, and it's the time for you to spend, people start to feel really nervous about seeing the balance of the account to come down. This is really common, but remember that every dollar that you accumulate was a way for you to buy your financial independence. Never forget that. You have done a remarkable job saving and investing money, and it's okay, to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So an advisor, can really help you set up a spending strategy that will make your financial plan work. The second one is social security strategies. So if people retire early, the thought about how to uh, get social security may change. Some people may think, well, because I'm retiring early, I necessarily should get social security as soon as I can, and that may not necessarily be the best case for you. For a lot of people, it may make sense to wait a little bit, but talking about your specific situation with your financial advisor is key. The tax considerations also change significantly if someone retires early. So, for example, if one retires early and retires like for good and doesn't make any income for some years, that person may be now in a lower tax bracket, which actually allows for a lot of smart tax strategies. For example, making some Roth conversions to pay the taxes when you are in a lower tax bracket, and you actually may stop you from paying so much in RMDs later on. So talking to your advisor about the right tax strategy for you may actually end up saving you, a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars. Health insurance, one thing in the U.S. Is, you may hear my accent. I'm not from the U.S. I'm originally from Brazil, even though I'm becoming a citizen in a month. But the thing about the U.S. is that your health insurance is tied to your work a lot of times. And then what that means is that if you decide to retire early, you may have to think about health insurance. And an advisor is a great source of advice on how to navigate, because healthcare, whether we want it or not, it's a very complicated topic in the US. A really important topic to talk about is actually cognitive decline, um, both for as people age, um, whether we want it or not. Sometimes, you know, it becomes harder for people to, keep track of their finances. And you may have relatives, parents, in my case, grandparents, that have suffered cognitive decline. And, the ability to be able to, set up a plan ahead of time in case something like this happens. We have done research. We actually have a paper at Vanguard about cognitive decline. And when I started working at Vanguard, I was actually very surprised because it's a very personal topic to talk about. I have had issues in my family related to this, and it's incredibly painful. It's incredibly personal, but it is something that is just so much better to talk ahead of time. And when we brought up this with our investors, we got so many messages about people that were so thankful that we were thinking about these issues with them, because it's something that people sometimes carry these, fears and this heavy, um, this, heavy things on their shoulders, and know that your advisors and are looking after you, and they're making these plans now, understanding, we certainly, never hope that this happens to anyone, but if it does, know that you are setting up a plan ahead of time, to minimize this risk and to protect your loved ones as well. And behavioral coaching, the market, like we said, is down. The stock market is down 25%. The bond market is down 10, 15%. So really unusual to see both of asset class to be down together. So a lot of people panic at these times. And I understand this current market situation is really painful. But if your plan was good 12 months ago when the market was up, it's still very good right now. Advisors, you know, come up with these plans to withstand both the good and the bad times. So stay the course, like we like to say at Vanguard. Be faithful in your plan. Check in with your advisor as you see needed. Because your thoughts and your emotions are valid, and you should talk to your advisors and process them because they are meaningful, right? our emotions and our thoughts, drive our lives. And if you need to talk to someone, yes, your advisor is the best person to, reassure that you are on the right track. And estate planning. This is that type of conversation that is always very hard. I just got all my documents ready, and it's incredibly emotional. We don't really like to think about the idea of us not being here. But it is that type of things that if it is so hard to talk about these things when you're here, imagine if you're not. Um, so it's just incredibly important to have your advisor by your side, to really customize your plan to your situation. And like I like to say, financial independence and financial independence retire early is really not a one size fits all. We talk about the 4%, but everything that we said here has so much nuance, and you have a say on how this gets done. It's your financial life. So yeah, talk to your advisor. It's certainly your best ally in any financial plan, in any dream that you want to have in your finances. Certainly are here to support your dreams, and you should talk to your advisor on your best way to get there. So just a quick conclusion about what we talked today. So the FIRE investors have relied on this 4% rule to determine how much and when to retire and how much to withdraw. So take into account the Vanguard principles for invest success. We took away 5 lessons from this. So the first one is to have a realistic return expectation. Second is to have an adequate retirement horizon. If you're going to retire early, 30 years is not a good a long enough retirement horizon. You may be in retirement for a lot longer. Using low cost investment portfolios, searching for that international diversification, and dynamic spending. Really be flexible with your spending in retirement. If the market's doing well, you're doing well, you can spend more. If the market's not doing well, cut back on spending a little bit, not much, but just a little bit, so that you take advantage of the market when it rebounds. And don't forget, your financial advisor can really help with the customization of your plan. Don't be afraid to dream. That's what I want to say. Like I said, every dollar that you accumulate is to buy your financial independence, your financial freedom, and your financial peace of mind. So lean on your advisors. They are here to make your plans come true. And just as always in finance, even though people try to put us all in one box, one size really does not fit all. So thanks for having me, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
That was so great. Thank you, Paulo. And again, I have a couple questions that came in here, but if you have any questions for Paulo, feel free to type them in the Q&A. I'm not surprised that this question came up. Does the 4% rule hold up in times of an inflation in bear markets? Does the 4% rule anticipate, I think is the word they wanted to say, that you will have inflation in bear markets throughout that runway?
Absolutely. And thanks for the question about inflation, because this is really top of our minds. And just to talk about inflation for just a second, what is so worrisome about inflation, right? Is that, especially early in your retirement, the 4% rule will allow you to you first calculate your 4% and then you adjust by inflation every year. So inflation is taken into account. And inflation, even though in the past, almost 30 years, we barely heard about inflation. Inflation in the US was a thing, in the 70s and the 80s. And, it's when really when the 4% rule was calculated, was really using the data from the 70s, from the 80s. So it does take into account inflation. That's a good news. And, it has withstood, all the inflationary scenarios of the 70s and of the 80s. So yes, it has withstood the test of inflation. What I would say too is, again, what makes the 4% rule even better in terms of working is if you allow for the flexibility in spending. So for example, this past year, the stock market hasn't done so well. So if you can cut back on spending just a little bit, and I'm just really talking about just a little like 5%,
Mhm.
it will help substantially your chances of achieving your retirement goals. And I would say if you're not retired yet, if you're in the accumulation phase, this is a fantastic time, to save and invest in the market. Like Warren Buffett likes to say, the supermarket is on sale.
Mhm.
So if you can, obviously it's a hard time for everybody, but if you can, it's a great time. But above all, consistency is key, right? You know, the plan that your advisor put together, and if you're following through with that plan, that plan will give you the best chance for investment success. So that's why, things change, markets go up and down, inflation goes up and down, but what your advisor has put together for you, is has taken those scenarios into account.
That's wonderful. Well, on that note, that wraps up our time together. Thank you so much, Paulo, for being with us today. If you would like more information or have specific retirement questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your Hightower financial advisor. And we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Have a great rest of the day.